So, what is a standard of performance and why does it matter? Asked nobody of me ever. But I think about this stuff. And so when our clients start saying things that tell me they have the ambition to expand beyond their current kind of status quo, even if that is relatively successful, I start thinking like, okay, gotcha. I love to play that game. Let's call it the top performance game. And again, top performance, not a unique term. I kind of stole it from Monty Morin, the ex co-CEO of Chipotle. And that's just all about establishing what it means to perform excellent work, and through consistent effort in doing so, elevating yourself, those around you, and your company or your organization. So top performance, just basically being a winning organization, being a winning team, being at the top of your game in your field of expertise. Bill Walsh, San Francisco 49ers, dynastic coach, took them from the bottom of the NFL barrel and put them right on top in just a few seasons. He never said, hey, I'm going to win a Super Bowl the third season I'm coach here. But he did say, like most NFL coaches, we're going to win a Super Bowl. And he believed, though, that that would happen by a relentless understanding and implementation of what he called his standard of performance. Again, not necessarily an ingenious name, but it doesn't need to be when it's super true. So for Bill Walsh, it was all about his standard of performance, which meant a very specific way of showing up and playing the game of football. And it wasn't just about the actual blocking and tackling and throwing and running and catching and play calling of football. It was as much or more about the attitudes and beliefs of every single member of the 49ers team. And that team he defined not just as the athletes on the field or even the coaches and the assistants, but every single individual in the 49ers organization at every single level. They all had to believe in and adhere to Bill Walsh's standard of performance. When you look at the top performing, most successful teams, individuals, organizations, they have a standard of performance that they relentlessly administer, all right, that has both qualitative and quantitative components. Quantitative, right? The things that you can count, all right? So that might be running a specific play, a very specific distance, adhering to the details of that play, all right? Running it by the book, that's quantitative, right? You can know, are we doing it this way or not? We've got a process for this. Are we following this process or not? There's a metric we're trying to achieve. It's a sales metric. It's a profit metric. It's whatever it might be. Are we hitting that number or are we not? All right. That's something that's quantitative, all right? And those are important. But the qualitative are sometimes the things that are maybe a little like softer, a little loosier or goosier, or maybe a little touchy-feely. And sometimes we feel less compelled or inspired to live by those. But those, again, sometimes are the reason why you are able to achieve the quantitative, all right? So these are, again, a lot about attitudes and beliefs, all right? So Bill Walsh, for example, he had a certain just idea of what your commitment to the team and your teammates looked like, all right? He was not into egos. And when he realized you were into your ego and yourself above the team, he called you on it. And if you demonstrated that behavior consistently and demonstrated that you were not really willing to shift from that, he fired your ass. You were gone. And sometimes, surprisingly, this would happen. And other people from the outside would be like, what is he doing over there? Well, he knew what he was doing because he was building a culture, right? And so your standard of performance has a lot to do with your culture and the development and sustenance of your culture, right? So these qualitative things, these ways of thinking, these ways of, I guess, showing up, these attitudes, these beliefs, they are also part of your standard performance. And so when you combine the qualitative and the quantitative, that's when you get some pretty remarkable results, because you're living it out and you're doing it in a very specific, precise, and measurable way. That's how you achieve top performance. And again, as I always like to say, that is the kind of leader that I want to be. That's the kind of organization that I want to lead. That's the kind of team that I want to be a part of. Those are the types of clients that I want to work with. And I know that our clients want that in anyone that is working for them or on their behalf. So for Of the C, some of the things that are part of our standard performance are to drive commitments and deadlines, to have direct, respectful communication that's effective, to communicate and through messaging that receives unsolicited feedback. So that's actually a quantitative thing. We can know if our clients are receiving unsolicited feedback, and we know that when they are, that it's working. Let me give you an example. We recently culminated a radio campaign here in Buffalo, New York, for our client, Emerald Heating and Cooling. We created their mascot, it's their logo, it's their mascot, many years ago. It's a duck. All right, it's a personified duck. It's a friendly looking duck. It's a heroic looking duck. It's got a little duck billed, kind of like Irish hat. It's pretty cute. And it didn't have a name. And we realized, you know what, it would be really cool if this duck had a name. So we created a campaign where the owners of the company, Marty and Gary Sheehan, a husband and wife duo that formed the company about 20-ish years ago, go back and forth about how the duck needs a name and, oh, what should we call the duck, and coming up with silly and absurd ideas for the duck, and the tension between the two is the duck still doesn't have a name. We drew this out for months. All right. And finally, we released the name. But through this period, we did not once ask anyone to make a suggestion for the name. We didn't, in the commercial, solicit and say, hey, if you've got a name for the duck, write in or call in. And yet people throughout the entire campaign, week in and week out, were writing and calling with suggestions for the name. When the techs and the installers would go to a customer's home, the customers would ask them, have you named the duck yet? Do you know what the duck's name's going to be? We never asked for any of that. We just created the messaging in a way so that that could potentially happen. So that's an example of, believe it or not, a quantitative measure. Are people talking about it in an unsolicited fashion or not? So that's how it works for us as perhaps an advertising agency. It might work differently for your kind of business, but every single business can have these measures and these components that are part of your standard performance. And some of these things are things that you're already doing. I guarantee you, you're already doing them. You just haven't given them language. You haven't written them down. So my advice to you would be, unsolicited, think about it, write them down, wordsmith them a little bit, and then share them with your team. Maybe even sit down with your team and work through them to discover ones that perhaps you are overlooking because they're just so innate to and inherent to who you are and how you do things that they're almost too obvious. All right. And sometimes you need someone else who has a little bit of distance to point it out to you. But I would encourage you to do that. It doesn't take long, and I think you'll find it to be pretty invigorating, and you'll now have a tool to lead your team and to pull yourselves up to greater levels of achievement.